I could approach that equation right now, Dr. Marcus Washington said calmly as the blonde math professor smirked from across his classroom. But either outcome would validate the premise of this interruption, that my worth as an educator depends on performing on command. What happens when a prestigious math professor publicly humiliates a black history teacher with an impossible equation, only to discover he's hiding credentials that put her own expertise to shame? When Dr. Patricia Evans bursts into Marcus Washington's classroom with a complex math problem, she has no idea she's challenging a man with a secret PhD from MIT. But academic hierarchies and assumptions about who belongs where are about to be shattered in ways nobody at Westlake University could have imagined. This powerful story explores prejudice, hidden brilliance, and the artificial boundaries we place around knowledge. You won't believe the mathematical showdown that's about to unfold. Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. Dr. Marcus Washington straightened his tie as he stood outside the dean's office at Westlake University. Today marked his first official day as an assistant professor of history, a position he had worked tirelessly to secure. The prestigious university had a reputation for academic excellence, and Marcus was determined to uphold that standard. "The dean will see you now," the secretary announced, gesturing toward the oak door. Marcus stepped into the spacious office where Dean Collins greeted him with a firm handshake. "Dr. Washington, welcome to Westlake. We're thrilled to have someone with your credentials joining our humanities department." "Thank you for the opportunity, sir. I'm excited to get started," Marcus replied, his deep voice carrying the confidence of someone who had overcome significant obstacles to reach this point. After a brief orientation, the dean personally escorted Marcus to the history department where he would meet his new colleagues. As they walked through the hallways, Marcus observed the diversity, or rather, the lack thereof, among the faculty they passed. The reality wasn't surprising, but it was still disappointing. "And here we are," Dean Collins announced as they entered a conference room where several professors were gathered for the monthly faculty meeting. "Everyone, I'd like to introduce our newest faculty member, Dr. Marcus Washington, who will be teaching American history with a focus on social movements." A round of polite applause followed, though Marcus noticed a few curious glances. At 33, he was younger than most of his colleagues, and as one of the few black professors at the university, he knew he'd be under additional scrutiny. "Dr. Washington comes to us from Howard University with stellar recommendations," the dean continued. As the meeting proceeded, Marcus was introduced to various department heads. When they reached the sciences section, his attention was drawn to a blonde woman who seemed to be commanding respect from everyone around her. "And this is Dr. Patricia Evans, head of our mathematics department," the dean said. "One of our most published faculty members." "A pleasure," Dr. Evans said, giving Marcus a cursory glance before turning back to her conversation about department funding. As Marcus found his seat, he couldn't help but notice how Dr. Evans dominated the conversation, occasionally talking over other faculty members, particularly those from the humanities departments. After the meeting, Marcus was shown to his office, a modest space but with a beautiful view of the campus quad. As he unpacked his books and arranged his desk, a knock came at his door. "Welcome to the history department," said Dr. Jameson, the department chair. "I hope you'll find Westlake to be a good fit. We're a family here." Marcus smiled, genuinely appreciative of the warm welcome. "Thank you. I'm looking forward to contributing to the department." As his first day came to an end, Marcus looked out his window at the students crossing the quad. Tomorrow, he would meet his first class. Despite the subtle hierarchies he'd already detected, he was determined to make his mark at Westlake, not just as the new black professor, but as an educator who could inspire and challenge his students to think critically about history and its relevance to the present day. In his second week at Westlake University, Marcus began to fully grasp the social dynamics at play. The institution, for all its prestige and claims of progressivism, operated on an unspoken caste system. The science departments, particularly mathematics, physics, and chemistry, enjoyed the lion's share of funding, prestige, and influence. Humanities, meanwhile, seemed to be fighting for scraps. Marcus noticed this hierarchy most visibly in the faculty dining hall. The tables weren't assigned, but they might as well have been. The mathematics and science professors claimed the central tables, while humanities faculty typically sat along the periphery. It wasn't malicious, just the way things had apparently always been. "Don't take it personally," advised Dr. Hernandez, another relatively new history professor, as they carried their lunch trays. "It's been like this since before I arrived. STEM gets the glory, we get, well, less." "I'm not taking it personally," Marcus replied, though he couldn't help but feel the weight of multiple identities at play. Was he being sidelined as a historian, as a younger faculty member, as a black man, or some combination of all three? They took seats at a table near the window, joining two English professors. The conversation flowed easily among them, discussing curriculum changes and student engagement strategies. Marcus was in the middle of describing his approach to teaching civil rights history when a burst of laughter from the center tables caught everyone's attention. Dr. Patricia Evans was holding court, her blonde hair catching the light as she gesticulated dramatically. "And that's why I told the dean that if we're going to maintain our ranking, we need to invest in people who are advancing real knowledge, not just rehashing the past." Her comment wasn't directed at anyone in particular, but the timing made Marcus pause mid-sentence. Several of his companions at the table exchanged knowing glances. "That's Dr. Evans for you," whispered Dr. Hernandez. Subtle as a sledgehammer. Later that afternoon, Marcus was preparing materials in the faculty resource room when Dr. Evans entered, accompanied by a teaching assistant carrying a stack of papers. "Dr. Washington, isn't it?" she said, her tone suggesting she was making an effort to remember him. "Yes, Dr. Evans. We met at the faculty meeting last week." "Of course." She nodded, scanning his materials. "American history. Fascinating subject. Though I've always wondered why we need so many history courses when one good survey class would suffice." Before Marcus could respond, she continued, "I suppose it keeps the humanities departments busy while the rest of us advance human knowledge." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Marcus maintained his composure. "History helps us understand how we got here and where we might be headed. I'd say that's advancing knowledge in a pretty fundamental way." "How quaint," she replied. "Well, best of luck with your retrospectives." With that, she turned her attention to her assistant, effectively dismissing Marcus. As he walked back to his office, Marcus reflected on the encounter. Dr. Evans wasn't just dismissive of history as a discipline, there was something personal in her tone. He wondered if she treated all new faculty this way or if there was something specific about him that had drawn her disdain. That evening, as he reviewed his lecture notes for the next day's class, Marcus received an email notification about an interdepartmental meeting scheduled for the end of the week. The topic, budget allocations for the upcoming academic year. According to the faculty grapevine, these meetings could get contentious, with departments essentially competing against each other for limited resources. Marcus sighed, closing his laptop. He hadn't come to Westlake looking for conflict, but it seemed that simply doing his job and advocating for his field would inevitably put him at odds with people like Dr. Evans. So be it. He hadn't overcome the obstacles in his path thus far by backing down from challenges, and he wasn't about to start now. The conference room was already tense when Marcus arrived for the interdepartmental meeting. Faculty members clustered in discipline-specific groups, with the science departments claiming the prime seats near the front. Marcus found an empty chair beside Dr. Hernandez, who gave him a slight nod of acknowledgement. "Brace yourself," Hernandez whispered. "These budget meetings can get ugly." Last year, Evans managed to siphon off funds that were originally earmarked for the humanities library expansion. Dean Collins called the meeting to order, outlining the university's financial situation with a series of slides. "As you can see, we have some difficult decisions ahead. While overall funding has increased by 3%, certain costs have risen by nearly 8%. Marcus studied the budget breakdown projected on the screen. The disparity was even more striking than he'd imagined. Mathematics received nearly triple the funding of history, despite having fewer majors. Before we open the floor for departmental presentations, the dean continued, I want to emphasize that we're one university community. These allocations aren't a reflection of any department's inherent value, but rather a strategic distribution of limited resources. A few skeptical murmurs rose from the humanities section. Clearly, this was a familiar platitude. The department heads began their presentations, each making their case for maintaining or increasing their share of the budget. Dr. Jameson, representing history, highlighted increased enrollment and the department's new digital humanities initiative. When it was Dr. Evans' turn, she approached the podium with confident strides. Her presentation was polished, emphasizing the mathematics department's research publications, grant acquisitions, and reputation enhancements for the university. Furthermore, she added, clicking to a slide showing comparative metrics, if we examine the quantifiable impact of each department on university rankings and student career outcomes, the data speaks for itself. The chart showed STEM fields towering over humanities in terms of graduate starting salaries and research citations. As Evans concluded, she glanced dismissively toward the history department. While I appreciate that some departments offer enrichment and breadth to our students' education, we must be pragmatic about what drives Westlake's prestige and financial sustainability. The dean opened the floor for questions and discussion. After several exchanges between department heads, Marcus raised his hand. The dean nodded in his direction. Dr. Washington, our newest faculty member. Welcome to your first budget meeting. Thank you, Dean Collins, Marcus began, standing to address the room. I appreciate Dr. Evans' presentation and the impressive metrics from the mathematics department. However, I'm concerned about reducing departmental value to purely quantitative measurements. He paused, noting that he had everyone's attention, including a slightly raised eyebrow from Dr. Evans. If we measure only what's easily countable, we miss the less tangible but equally vital contributions of humanities education. History graduates may not have the highest starting salaries, but they develop critical thinking, contextual understanding, and civic engagement skills that benefit society in ways that aren't captured in these metrics. Dr. Evans cut in before he could continue. While that's a lovely sentiment, Dr. Washington, this is a budget meeting, not a philosophy seminar. We deal in facts and figures here, not intangible benefits. Several science faculty members chuckled, and Marcus felt a flash of anger that he carefully controlled. With all due respect, Dr. Evans, dismissing these benefits as mere sentiment is precisely the kind of thinking that undermines educational institutions. Not everything of value can be quantified. Spoken like someone whose work wouldn't hold up to quantification, Evans retorted. But I suppose that's the difference between sciences and, well, not sciences. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Dean Collins cleared his throat. Let's maintain a collegial atmosphere, please. Of course, Evans smiled thinly. I'm simply pointing out that while history is an interesting subject for general knowledge, it hardly drives innovation or equips students with the skills needed in today's economy. It's not even a discipline that requires rigorous analytical thinking. The dismissal was so blatant that even some of the science faculty looked uncomfortable. Marcus felt every eye in the room on him, awaiting his response. I find it interesting, Marcus replied evenly, that someone so devoted to analytical thinking would make such a sweeping generalization based on apparent prejudice rather than evidence. Evans' face flushed slightly. I base my assessments on data, Dr. Washington. Perhaps that's a methodology you're not familiar with in your field. Actually, Marcus countered, historians are quite familiar with data analysis, contextualization of evidence, and critical evaluation of sources, skills that seem lacking in your assessment of our discipline. The dean intervened before Evans could respond. Thank you both for your passionate perspectives. This is exactly the kind of cross-disciplinary dialogue that makes academia vibrant. It was a diplomatic attempt to defuse the situation, but the tension remained palpable. As the meeting continued, Marcus could feel Dr. Evans' cold stare from across the room. He had made an enemy today, but he couldn't bring himself to regret standing up for his discipline, and by extension, for himself and his students. When the meeting adjourned, several humanities professors stopped to thank Marcus for speaking up. Dr. Jameson patted his shoulder. Bold move for a new faculty member, but someone needed to say it. Just be prepared, Patricia Evans has a long memory and considerable influence here. Marcus nodded, watching as Evans huddled with several administrators across the room. He had faced prejudice and dismissal before, in various forms throughout his academic career. This was just another challenge to navigate, and perhaps an opportunity to change some minds along the way. Marcus was reviewing essays in his office when a hesitant knock interrupted his concentration. He looked up to see a young man hovering in the doorway, backpack clutched tightly against his chest. "Professor Washington. I'm James Miller from your American Social Movements class. Do you have a minute?" "Of course, James. Come in." Marcus gestured to the chair across from his desk, noting the student's anxious demeanor. "What can I help you with?" James sat down, his lanky frame seemingly too big for the chair. "I really enjoy your class, sir. The way you connect historical movements to today's issues, it makes sense to me." "I'm glad to hear that," Marcus replied, sensing there was more to this visit. "The thing is..." James hesitated, "I'm struggling with some of my other courses, especially Dr. Evans' Calculus 2. I'm on academic probation, and if I don't pull up my GPA this semester, I could lose my scholarship." Marcus leaned forward, recognizing the gravity of the situation. "That sounds stressful. Have you spoken with Dr. Evans about getting extra help?" James winced. "I tried, but she said if I wasn't prepared to put in the work necessary for a rigorous discipline, maybe I should consider less demanding majors." The dismissive phrasing sounded exactly like Dr. Evans. "I see," Marcus said carefully. "And what's your major?" "Education, with a focus on high school history. I want to teach in communities like the one I grew up in," James explained. "But we have to take 2 semesters of calculus as part of the general science requirement." Marcus nodded, understanding the predicament. Many talented students who wanted to serve in critical fields like education were being filtered out by requirements that weren't always relevant to their future careers. "There's another issue too," James continued, his voice dropping. "There's this student, Ryan, who refuses to sit down in Dr. Evans' class. He just stands at the back. She gets really mad about it, says he's being disruptive, but he won't budge." "Why won't he sit down?" Marcus asked, curious about this act of defiance. "He has back pain," James explained. "From when Dr. Evans made him sit through a 3-hour exam last semester despite his protests. She thought he was trying to cheat by moving around, but he really was in pain. Now he can barely sit for 20 minutes without it flaring up." Marcus frowned, concerned by this account. "Has Ryan reported this to the Disability Services Office?" "He tried, but without medical documentation, they couldn't help much. His family doesn't have great insurance." James shrugged. "Dr. Evans calls him the standing problem, in front of everyone." The conversation shifted back to James's academic struggles. As they reviewed his assignments, Marcus realized James had a solid conceptual understanding but struggled with the abstract symbols and formal proofs of advanced mathematics. "You know," Marcus said thoughtfully, "mathematics is really about patterns and relationships. The symbols are just a language to express those patterns." He grabbed a blank sheet of paper and sketched out a simple coordinate plane. "Let me show you a different way to think about these calculus problems." For the next half hour, Marcus walked James through several concepts, translating the abstract mathematical notation into historical analogies and visual representations. James's eyes gradually lit up with understanding. "That actually makes sense," James said, staring at the paper in disbelief. "How do you know all this math stuff? You're a history professor." Marcus smiled enigmatically. "History and mathematics aren't as separate as some might think. Both require recognizing patterns and understanding how different elements influence each other over time." As their impromptu tutoring session concluded, James gathered his materials with renewed confidence. "Thanks, Professor Washington. This helped a lot." "Happy to help, James. And if you need further assistance with calculus, my door is open." After James left, Marcus sat back in his chair, troubled by what he'd heard about Dr. Evans' treatment of students with different learning needs or physical challenges. Education should be about opening doors, not closing them. The incident with Ryan particularly disturbed him. No student should be subjected to physical pain or public humiliation in the pursuit of education. Marcus made a mental note to keep an eye on the situation. He wasn't looking for conflict with Dr. Evans, but he wouldn't stand by if students were being mistreated. Every student deserved dignity and support, regardless of which department their professors came from. Marcus was heading to the faculty lounge for a much-needed coffee when he heard Dr. Evans' distinctive voice echoing down the hallway. He slowed his pace, not wanting to interrupt what sounded like a heated conversation. "It's absolutely ridiculous," she was saying to another professor Marcus didn't recognize. "These history majors come into my class not knowing basic algebraic principles. How did they even graduate high school?" "Well, not everyone is mathematically inclined, Patricia," the other professor replied mildly. "It's not about inclination, it's about minimal standards," Evans continued, her voice sharp with frustration. "Yesterday, I had a student, James Miller, who couldn't solve a simple differential equation. He's planning to become a teacher. Imagine the next generation being taught by someone who can't grasp fundamental calculus." Marcus paused near the water fountain, now fully invested in the conversation. "And that other student, the one who refuses to sit down. He's turning it into some kind of protest now. Claims I caused his back problems." Dr. Evans let out an exasperated sigh. Students these days want accommodations for everything instead of rising to the challenge. Marcus had heard enough. He rounded the corner, making his presence known. Both professors looked up, Dr. Evans' expression shifting from surprise to something more guarded. "Dr. Washington," she acknowledged coolly. "Heading to your office?" "Actually, I was going for coffee," Marcus replied evenly. "But I couldn't help overhearing your concerns about James Miller." Dr. Evans raised an eyebrow. "Eavesdropping, were we?" "Hard not to hear in these hallways," Marcus said with a shrug. "James came to see me yesterday. He's struggling, but he's working hard." "You know him?" Evans asked, surprise evident in her tone. "He's in my American Social Movements class. Bright student, very engaged." Evans crossed her arms. "Well, engagement in history classes is one thing. Mathematical rigor is quite another." "True," Marcus conceded. "But different students learn in different ways. James actually has a good intuitive grasp of mathematical concepts when they're presented in context." "With all due respect, Dr. Washington," Evans said, emphasizing his title slightly, "I've been teaching mathematics for over 20 years. I think I know how to identify a student who lacks aptitude." "Perhaps," Marcus replied, maintaining his composure. "Or perhaps some students just need different approaches to unlock their potential." The other professor glanced uncomfortably between them before mumbling something about a meeting and making a quick exit. "Different approaches," Evans repeated with a thin smile. "Is that what you've been doing? Playing tutor in subjects outside your expertise?" "I was simply helping a student who asked for assistance," Marcus responded. "Isn't that what we're all here for?" Evans studied him for a moment. "Interesting that you feel qualified to assist with calculus problems. I wasn't aware history PhDs required much mathematical training." "You'd be surprised what historians need to know," Marcus said simply, deciding not to elaborate further. "Anyway, I should get that coffee. Have a good afternoon, Dr. Evans." As he turned to leave, Evans called after him. "Dr. Washington. A word of advice, it's best to stay in your lane here at Westlake. Crossing department boundaries can create confusion." Marcus paused, then turned back with a measured smile. "Thank you for your concern, Dr. Evans. But in my experience, the most interesting discoveries happen at the intersections." As he continued toward the faculty lounge, Marcus could feel Evans' gaze following him. The conversation had revealed more than she probably intended, not just about her dismissive attitude towards struggling students, but about her rigid view of academic disciplines as separate territories to be defended rather than connected fields of knowledge. He made a mental note to check in with James again soon. And perhaps it was time to learn more about this standing student, Ryan, whose situation seemed particularly troubling. The annual interdepartmental mixer was held in the university's Grand Alumni Hall, a high-ceilinged room with oak paneling and portraits of Westlake's distinguished past presidents and benefactors. Faculty members from all departments mingled over wine and hors d'oeuvres, the usual academic hierarchies temporarily softened by social niceties and alcohol. Marcus arrived fashionably late, having stayed after class to help a student with an upcoming paper. He scanned the room, noting how even here, faculty had naturally segregated themselves along disciplinary lines. The sciences dominated the center of the room, while humanities professors clustered near the windows and buffet tables. Dr. Washington. Glad you could make it, Dr. Jameson approached, handing him a glass of red wine. First department mixer, it's a bit of a tradition. Supposedly fosters interdepartmental collaboration, though mostly it just gives us all a chance to gossip outside our usual circles. Marcus smiled. I appreciate the warm welcome. It's good to see everyone in a more relaxed setting. As the evening progressed, Marcus made an effort to circulate beyond the history department, engaging with professors from English, philosophy, and even some of the more approachable science faculty. Most seemed genuinely interested in his work on the intersection of social movements and economic policy in mid-20th century America. He was deep in conversation with a sociology professor when he noticed Dr. Evans holding court across the room, surrounded by several mathematics colleagues and a few administrators, including Dean Collins. Absolutely essential that we maintain rigorous standards, Evans was saying, her voice carrying across the room during a momentary lull in conversation. We can't water down STEM education just because some students find it challenging. No one's suggesting we water down anything, Patricia, the dean replied diplomatically. But retention rates are a concern across departments. Perhaps in some departments more than others, Evans said with a pointed look toward the humanities section of the room. Though I suppose it's easier to retain students when the material doesn't require objective right or wrong answers. Several of her colleagues chuckled, and Marcus felt a ripple of tension spread through the room. Dr. Jameson appeared at his side, quietly murmuring, just ignore her. She gets like this at every faculty function. But Marcus had already caught Evans' eye, and to his dismay, she was making her way toward him, wine glass in hand. Dr. Washington, she greeted him with exaggerated warmth. I was just telling the dean about our hallway conversation the other day. You've taken an interest in our mathematics students, I hear. Just one student who happens to be in both our classes, Marcus clarified, aware that several nearby conversations had quieted as people tuned into their exchange. Yes, James Miller, Evans nodded. He submitted a much improved problem set this week. Almost suspiciously improved, in fact. The implication hung in the air. Marcus kept his expression neutral, though he felt a flash of anger at the insinuation. I'm glad to hear he's doing better. He's been working hard. Indeed, Evans continued, swirling her wine. Though his solutions employed some rather unconventional approaches. Almost as if someone had been teaching him alternative methods. The small crowd around them had grown, faculty members sensing the building tension. Dean Collins drifted closer, perhaps preparing to intervene if necessary. I simply showed him how to visualize the problems differently, Marcus explained evenly. Sometimes a fresh perspective helps concepts click. A fresh perspective, Evans repeated, her tone making the phrase sound ridiculous. From a history professor. On differential calculus. She turned to address the growing audience. Isn't that fascinating? Perhaps next I'll offer tutorials on the Reconstruction era. Several people laughed nervously, eyes darting between Evans and Marcus. I didn't realize mathematics was so territorial, Marcus remarked, maintaining his composure. In my experience, knowledge tends to be more interconnected. There's interconnected, and then there's dabbling in fields where one lacks proper qualification, Evans countered, her smile not reaching her eyes. Tell me, Dr. Washington, what exactly is your background in mathematics? Did you minor in it as an undergraduate, perhaps? The question was clearly meant to embarrass him, to publicly establish his lack of credentials in her domain. Marcus could feel the weight of expectation from those watching, some hoping for conflict, others uncomfortable with the obvious power play. My focus has been on historical analysis, Marcus replied diplomatically, unwilling to be drawn into her game. But good teaching often crosses disciplinary boundaries. How democratic, Evans said with a dismissive laugh. Though I'm curious, could you even solve a basic differential equation yourself? Or are you just offering vague encouragements to struggling students? The challenge was explicit now, and the room had grown uncomfortably quiet. Dean Collins stepped forward. Patricia, I think we're veering away from the spirit of the evening. It's a simple question, Evans insisted, her eyes fixed on Marcus. If Dr. Washington is qualified to tutor mathematics students, surely he wouldn't mind demonstrating some basic competency. Marcus felt dozens of eyes on him, the moment stretching uncomfortably. He could sense the mixture of discomfort and curiosity from his colleagues. Some seemed embarrassed by Evans' behavior, others secretly entertained by the conflict. I appreciate your concern for the students, Dr. Evans, Marcus finally said, his voice calm and measured. But this hardly seems the appropriate venue for an impromptu examination. Of course, Evans replied with exaggerated understanding. Perhaps another time, then. As she turned away, she added just loudly enough for those nearby to hear, as I thought. Humanities professors, full of theories, short on demonstrable skills. The conversation gradually resumed around them, but the damage was done. Marcus maintained his dignity, continuing to socialize, but he could feel the speculation and whispers following him for the remainder of the evening. Later, as he was preparing to leave, Dr. Hernandez caught up with him near the coat check. Don't let Evans get to you. She does this to everyone she perceives as a threat. A threat? Marcus asked, surprised. I'm hardly threatening her position. You stood up to her at the budget meeting. You're popular with students. And now you're helping one of her students succeed where she failed. Hernandez shrugged. In Patricia Evans' world, that makes you dangerous. As Marcus drove home that night, he replayed the encounter in his mind. Evans' challenge had been calculated to put him in his place, to publicly reinforce the hierarchy she believed in so firmly. What bothered him most wasn't the personal slight, but the toxic educational philosophy it represented, one that valued disciplinary territories over student success, and academic pedigrees over actual learning. He had avoided her trap tonight, but Marcus suspected this was just the opening move in a longer game. Sooner or later, Dr. Patricia Evans would force a more direct confrontation, and when that moment came, he would need to be prepared. The following Wednesday began like any other for Marcus. His morning lecture on civil rights legislation had gone well, with particularly engaging student discussions. Now, in his afternoon seminar on social movement theory, he was deep into an analysis of coalition-building strategies when the classroom door swung open without warning. Dr. Patricia Evans stood in the doorway, a flash drive in one hand and a determined expression on her face. Behind her hovered her teaching assistant, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Excuse the interruption, Dr. Washington," Evans announced without a trace of actual apology in her tone. The 20 students in the seminar room turned in unison, surprise evident on their faces. Marcus paused mid-sentence, maintaining his composure despite the unexpected intrusion. "Dr. Evans. We're in the middle of a class session." "This will only take a moment," she replied, striding confidently to the front of the room. She handed her flash drive to the teaching assistant, who reluctantly moved to the computer connected to the classroom projector. "Students, please forgive this brief interruption," Evans addressed the class with a tight smile. "An interesting situation has arisen that I thought might be educational for all of you." Marcus watched with growing concern as the assistant pulled up a file on the projector. The screen filled with a complex mathematical equation, a particularly challenging partial differential equation by the looks of it, with multiple variables and nested integrals. "Dr. Washington and I have been having an ongoing discussion about interdisciplinary expertise," Evans continued, turning to face Marcus directly. At our faculty mixer, we never quite resolved our debate about qualifications and appropriate academic boundaries. The students glanced between the two professors, sensing the tension. Marcus could see confusion and curiosity in their expressions. "I've been thinking about our conversation," Evans said, gesturing toward the projected equation. "And it occurred to me that the best way to demonstrate my point would be through a simple challenge." "Dr. Evans," Marcus began, his voice low but firm, "this is highly inappropriate." "Oh, it's just a bit of collegial fun," she dismissed with a wave of her hand. "This equation here is from my advanced calculus course. Nothing too complex, my better students can solve it in about 20 minutes. The equation on screen was anything but simple, and Marcus could see some of his students' eyes widening as they took in the intimidating mathematical notation. "I thought," Evans continued with feigned innocence, "since you've taken an interest in helping mathematics students, you might enjoy demonstrating your approach to solving such a problem. Show us this fresh perspective you mentioned." The classroom fell completely silent. Marcus could feel every eye on him, his students watching to see how he would respond to this obvious ambush. Some looked embarrassed on his behalf, others curious about what would happen next. "Dr. Evans," Marcus said evenly, "I don't recall agreeing to interrupt each other's classes for impromptu challenges." "Oh, come now," Evans pressed, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Surely a quick demonstration wouldn't be a problem. Unless, of course, you're not actually qualified to assist mathematics students after all." The implication hung in the air. Marcus could see his students shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This was exactly what Evans wanted, to publicly embarrass him, to expose what she assumed was his mathematical ignorance, to put him in his place as a mere history professor who had overstepped his bounds. "My qualifications aren't on trial here," Marcus replied calmly. "But your professional conduct might be." A few students inhaled sharply at his response. Evans' smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered. "I'm simply offering an opportunity for interdepartmental dialogue," she insisted. "The kind of boundary crossing you yourself advocated for. Unless that was just talk." Marcus glanced at his students, then at the equation still displayed on the screen. He recognized it as a particularly tricky problem involving wave propagation, the kind typically reserved for upper-level applied mathematics courses. Evans clearly expected him to either embarrass himself attempting it or back down entirely, confirming her assumption about humanities professors being all theory and no substance. "Dr. Evans," Marcus said after a measured pause, "my students and I were in the middle of examining the organizational structures of the 1960s freedom movement. We have limited time together each week." Of course," Evans nodded with exaggerated understanding. "Far be it from me to disrupt the important work of discussing history that's already happened." She turned to the teaching assistant. "Christopher, you can disconnect the flash drive." As the assistant moved to comply, Evans addressed the class once more. "Sorry for the interruption, students. I just thought it might be illuminating to see different disciplines in dialogue. Perhaps another time." The condescension in her tone was unmistakable. As she turned to leave, she paused beside Marcus and spoke quietly, though not so quietly that the front row couldn't hear, "As I thought. Some of us do, others just talk about doing." Something shifted in Marcus at that moment, a quiet determination replacing his initial shock and anger. Before Evans could reach the door, he spoke. "Actually, Dr. Evans, why don't you leave that equation up for a moment?" Evans turned, surprise briefly visible on her face before she composed herself. "Oh. Changed your mind?" "Not at all," Marcus replied calmly. "I still think this is inappropriate and unprofessional. But since you've already disrupted my class, we might as well make this a teachable moment, about more than just mathematics." He turned to his students. "Class, it seems we have an unexpected opportunity to discuss how academic hierarchies and territorial behavior can manifest in institutional settings." He gestured toward Evans. "Some see knowledge as a zero-sum game, where acknowledging expertise in others somehow diminishes one's own status." Evans' face flushed slightly. "That's hardly, But, Marcus continued, walking toward the projected equation, others understand that knowledge transcends artificial boundaries. He picked up a piece of chalk and turned to face both his class and Dr. Evans, his decision made. So let's examine this equation, shall we? As Marcus stood before the projected equation, chalk in hand, time seemed to slow. The classroom remained completely silent, the tension palpable. Marcus could feel his heart rate accelerating, a familiar pressure building in his chest, one he hadn't felt since his graduate school days. For a brief moment, he was transported back to his first year at MIT, sitting in an advanced mathematics seminar where he was the only black student, one of the professors openly questioning whether he really belonged in such a rigorous program. That same feeling of being watched, evaluated, judged not just on his abilities but on expectations about what those abilities should be. He looked at the equation again, a complex partial differential equation related to wave propagation. The kind of problem he hadn't tackled in years, at least not formally. Was he really going to do this? Was he going to play into Evan's hands, dance to her tune, just to prove a point? Marcus glanced at his students, their faces a mixture of confusion, concern, and curiosity. Then at Dr. Evans, standing near the door with a barely concealed triumphant expression, clearly expecting him to flounder. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about challenging the artificial hierarchies that limited students like James, like Ryan, like so many others who didn't fit neatly into the boxes people like Evans had created. His mind drifted to his grandfather's voice, "Sometimes you have to play their game to change the rules, son." Marcus took a deep breath and made his decision. "Before I approach this equation," he addressed the room, "I want to make something clear. What's happening right now, this ambush, this public challenge, represents everything that's wrong with how we sometimes approach education." He turned directly to Evans. "Dr. Evans believes she's exposing my limitations, demonstrating the superiority of her field over mine, and reinforcing an academic hierarchy where STEM disciplines inherently outrank humanities." Evans shifted uncomfortably but maintained her composure. "I'm merely suggesting that specific expertise matters, Dr. Washington." "It does," Marcus agreed. "But expertise isn't always what we assume it to be, and knowledge isn't confined to departmental boundaries." He turned back to his students. "What you're witnessing isn't really about mathematics. It's about power, who has it, who defines it, and how it's wielded in academic spaces." Marcus set down the chalk and took a few steps toward his desk, making a decision. The classroom was so quiet you could hear the soft hum of the projector. Even Evans seemed caught off guard by his shift in tone. "I could approach that equation right now," Marcus continued. "I could attempt to solve it and either succeed or fail. But either outcome would validate the premise of this interruption, that my worth as an educator, my right to help students across disciplines, depends on performing on command." He looked directly at Evans. "And that's not a premise I'm willing to accept." For a moment, Evans' expression flickered between surprise and satisfaction, apparently believing he was backing down. "As I suspected," she began, but Marcus raised his hand, cutting her off. "I'm not finished, Dr. Evans." The authority in his voice surprised even him. Evans' mouth closed, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Students," Marcus addressed the class again, "throughout history, marginalized individuals have been subjected to proof tests, demands to demonstrate exceptional ability just to be granted the basic respect automatically accorded to others. These tests aren't really about competence, they're about maintaining existing power structures." He could see understanding dawning on some faces, particularly among his students of color. "So no, I won't solve this equation as a parlor trick, as entertainment, or to satisfy Dr. Evans' challenge. That would only reinforce the problematic dynamic she's created." Evans' face flushed with anger. "This is simply deflection, Dr. Washington. If you could solve it, you would." Marcus studied her for a moment, then nodded slightly. "You know what? You're right about one thing, this is a teachable moment." He walked back to the board, picking up the chalk again. The room held its collective breath. "I won't solve this as a performance," Marcus said clearly. "But I will use it to demonstrate a larger point about how knowledge works." He began writing on the board next to the projected equation, not attempting to solve it directly but instead sketching out a connection between wave propagation mathematics and the spread of social movements, how similar mathematical principles could model both physical phenomena and human behavior in groups. This equation, he explained as he worked, describes how waves move through a medium. But with some adaptations, similar mathematical frameworks can help us understand how ideas propagate through society, how tipping points in public opinion function, how protest tactics spread from one movement to another. He continued sketching out the analogies, drawing connections between the mathematics on screen and historical phenomena, demonstrating not just understanding of the equation but an ability to translate it into entirely different contexts. The students were leaning forward now, engrossed. Even Evan's teaching assistant was watching with undisguised interest. As Marcus finished his impromptu lecture, he turned back to Evans. Mathematics isn't just about solving equations in isolation, Dr. Evans. It's a language for describing patterns in our world, patterns that cross the artificial boundaries we've drawn between disciplines. He set down the chalk. Now, if you'll excuse us, my students and I were in the middle of a scheduled discussion about coalition building in social movements. Unless you'd care to stay and contribute. We welcome interdisciplinary perspectives here. The invitation was polite but firm, a clear dismissal. Evans stood frozen for a moment, clearly uncertain how to respond to this unexpected turn. Her challenge had been neither accepted nor rejected in the way she'd anticipated, but transformed into something else entirely. I have another class to prepare for, she finally said, her voice slightly less confident than before. Christopher, let's go. As Evans and her assistant gathered their things, Marcus returned to his lecture notes, deliberately turning his attention back to his students. The message was clear, the interruption was over, the class would continue as planned. When the door closed behind Evans, a student in the back row let out a low whistle of appreciation. A tentative laugh rippled through the classroom, releasing some of the built-up tension. Now, Marcus said with a small smile, where were we? Ah yes, coalition building across diverse interest groups. As we've just seen, sometimes the most interesting developments occur at the boundaries between seemingly different domains. As he resumed his lecture, Marcus felt a complex mixture of emotions. He had neither fully accepted nor rejected Evans' challenge, instead, he'd reframed it entirely, refusing to play by her rules while still demonstrating his competence. It was a subtle victory, but an important one. But he also knew this wasn't over. Evans had been caught off guard today, but she wouldn't back down so easily. Sooner or later, he would have to decide whether to fully reveal his mathematical background, and deal with all the questions and assumptions that would follow. For now, though, he had a class to teach and students who deserved his full attention. The next move in this academic chess game could wait for another day. Word traveled fast at Westlake University. By the following morning, multiple versions of Marcus and Evans' confrontation were circulating among faculty and students alike. Some accounts painted Marcus as having cleverly sidestepped the challenge, while others suggested he had somehow humiliated the mathematics professor without actually solving the equation. Marcus tried to ignore the whispers and stares as he made his way to his morning office hours. He had just settled at his desk when there was a knock at his door. "Come in," he called, expecting a student. Instead, James Miller entered, looking both excited and nervous. "Professor Washington, everyone's talking about what happened with Dr. Evans yesterday. Is it true she burst into your class with some impossible equation?" Marcus sighed. "News travels fast around here. Yes, there was an incident. But I wouldn't call it impossible. Some people are saying you refused to solve it," James continued, "but others say you showed her up somehow without actually doing the math." "The truth is somewhere in between," Marcus replied carefully. "I chose not to engage with her challenge on her terms." James nodded slowly. "I get it. It was a trap." "In a way, yes," Marcus acknowledged. "But that's not why I'm telling you this. How are things going in Dr. Evans' class?" "Better, actually," James admitted. "Those visualizations you showed me really helped. I got A/B on the last problem set." "That's excellent." Marcus smiled genuinely. I'm proud of you, James. James hesitated before continuing. There's something else, Professor. Dr. Evans is looking for you. She came to the history department earlier, but you weren't in yet. She seemed different. Not angry, exactly, but intense. Marcus nodded, not entirely surprised. Thank you for letting me know. After James left, Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering his options. Whatever Evans was planning, it would likely come to a head soon. The question was whether to meet it head-on or continue deflecting. His contemplation was interrupted by another knock, this one sharper, more insistent. When he opened the door, Dr. Evans stood there, alone this time. Her usual confidence remained, but there was something different in her demeanor, a focused intensity rather than casual superiority. Dr. Washington, she said without preamble. May I come in? Marcus gestured for her to enter, closing the door behind her. What can I do for you, Dr. Evans? She placed a folder on his desk. No students this time. No audience. Just you and me in this. Marcus opened the folder to find a printout of yesterday's equation, along with several additional pages of related mathematical problems, all handwritten, all significantly more complex than the one she had projected in his classroom. What is this? He asked, though he already suspected the answer. A genuine test, not a performance, Evans replied, sitting down across from him. No witnesses, no games. I want to know if you can actually solve these. Marcus studied her face, searching for the trap. Why? What does it matter to you? Because either you've been misrepresenting your qualifications, she said evenly, or there's more to your background than you've shared. Either way, I want to know who I'm dealing with. It was a fair point, if bluntly delivered. Marcus looked down at the equations again. They were elegant, challenging, and would require full concentration, not the kind of problems one could fake knowledge about. 1 hour, Evans continued. That's what my graduate students would get. Solve what you can. Marcus considered refusing again, explaining once more why such testing was problematic. But something in Evans' expression had changed, there was genuine curiosity there, perhaps even a begrudging respect for how he'd handled yesterday's confrontation. All right, he finally said, pulling the papers toward him. 1 hour. No interruptions. Evans nodded, checking her watch before sitting back in her chair, observing him. Marcus took a deep breath and focused on the first problem. It had been years since he'd worked through equations like these formally, but the familiar patterns came back to him as he began writing. The symbols and relationships flowed through his mind with a clarity that surprised even him, muscle memory taking over as he worked methodically through each step. For the next 50 minutes, the only sounds in the office were the scratching of his pen and the occasional rustle of paper as he moved from one problem to the next. Evans remained silent, watching intently as he filled page after page with calculations, transformations, and solutions. When he finally set down his pen and pushed the completed work across the desk, Evans leaned forward to examine it. Her expression gave nothing away as she compared his solutions with her own notes, checking his work step by step. Finally, she looked up, her face unreadable. You solved all of them. Correctly. Even the last one, which was deliberately designed to be misleading. Marcus didn't respond, waiting for her to continue. You're not just familiar with calculus, she said slowly. This is graduate-level applied mathematics. Beyond what any history program would require, even as a methodology course. Yes, Marcus acknowledged simply. Who are you, Dr. Washington? Evans asked, a new note of genuine curiosity in her voice. Where did you learn to do this? The moment of truth had arrived. Marcus had spent years compartmentalizing this part of his identity, focusing on his historical research, allowing assumptions about his background to go unchallenged. But perhaps it was time for a different approach. I have a PhD in history from Howard University, he began. But before that, I completed a doctorate in applied mathematics at MIT. Evans' eyes widened slightly, the first genuine surprise he'd seen from her. A double doctorate? Why wouldn't you list that in your faculty profile? Because I wanted to be hired as a historian on the strength of my historical research, Marcus explained. Not as a token interdisciplinary curiosity, or worse, as the department's diversity hire who also does math. Understanding dawned on Evan's face. You deliberately omitted your mathematics background. I didn't omit it, Marcus corrected. My MIT degree is listed in my full CV. But I don't lead with it, and I don't generally volunteer the information unless it's directly relevant to my work. But why transition from mathematics to history? Evans pressed, genuine confusion in her voice. Why would anyone leave a prestigious STEM field for the humanities? Marcus finished for her, a hint of challenge in his tone. Because after completing my mathematics doctorate, I realized that the questions that truly motivated me, about how societies change, how power structures evolve, how movements create lasting transformation, required historical analysis as much as mathematical modeling. He leaned forward slightly. And frankly, the culture in many mathematics departments wasn't particularly welcoming to someone like me. The constant need to prove myself, to be exceptional just to be considered adequate, it was exhausting. Evans had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable at this. I see. Do you? Marcus asked quietly. Because from what I've observed, and from what students like James and Ryan have experienced, not much has changed. Evans' jaw tightened. I hold all my students to the same high standards. There's a difference between high standards and making certain students feel they don't belong, Marcus pointed out. Ryan stands in your class because sitting causes him pain you dismissed as an excuse. James was struggling not because he lacks ability, but because your teaching approach didn't connect with how he learns. That's not fair, Evans began defensively, but Marcus continued. What's not fair is creating arbitrary hurdles for students based on your preconceptions about who belongs in mathematics and who doesn't. The truth of his words hung in the air between them. Evans looked down at the solved equations, then back at Marcus, something shifting in her expression. You could have solved that equation in class yesterday, she said finally. Easily. Why didn't you? Because it wasn't about the equation, Marcus replied. It was about power dynamics, about performing on command to prove my worth. And that's a game I refuse to play, not because I couldn't win, but because the game itself is flawed. Evans sat back, appearing to truly see Marcus for the first time, not as a history professor encroaching on her territory, but as a colleague with expertise that matched or perhaps even exceeded her own in certain areas. Dr. Washington, she said finally, gathering her papers, I believe I've misjudged you. And perhaps some other things as well. It wasn't quite an apology, but coming from Patricia Evans, it might as well have been. Marcus nodded in acknowledgement, sensing a significant shift in their dynamic. As Evans stood to leave, she paused at the door. I'd be interested to hear more about your work connecting mathematical models to historical analysis sometime. Perhaps over coffee? I'd like that, Marcus replied, genuine despite their complicated history. After she left, Marcus sat quietly at his desk, processing what had just happened. The secret he'd kept closely guarded for professional reasons was now out, at least to Evans. How that would change things remained to be seen. But for the first time since arriving at Westlake, Marcus felt he had truly been seen, not just as a history professor, not just as a black academic, but as the complex, multifaceted scholar he actually was. It was both liberating and terrifying, opening possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to consider since changing fields. Whatever came next, the carefully maintained boundaries between his past and present had finally begun to blur. The question was whether Westlake University, and Dr. Patricia Evans, were ready for the implications. By Monday morning, the atmosphere at Westlake had subtly shifted. As Marcus walked through the faculty building, he noticed colleagues looking at him differently, some with newfound respect, others with curiosity, and a few with what appeared to be mild confusion. Clearly, word had spread. Dr. Jameson caught up with him in the hallway. So, the history department chair said, falling into step beside him, were you planning to mention your mathematics background at some point, or was it going to be our department's best-kept secret? Marcus sighed. I see Dr. Evans has been talking. Actually, she's been surprisingly discreet, Jameson replied. But the dean called me this morning asking about your interdisciplinary potential. Apparently, Evans suggested some kind of joint position or collaborative research initiative. This was unexpected. Marcus had anticipated many possible outcomes from his revelation to Evans, but enthusiastic professional endorsement hadn't been among them. That's interesting, Marcus managed. It's more than interesting, Jameson countered. It's unprecedented. Patricia Evans doesn't share the spotlight, much less advocate for cross-departmental collaboration. Whatever happened between you two must have been seismic. Before Marcus could respond, a group of students approached, including James and several others from Dr. Evans' calculus class. Their expressions ranged from awe to barely contained excitement. Professor Washington, one of them began, is it true you have a PhD in applied mathematics from MIT? And there it was, his carefully maintained professional compartmentalization, undone in the space of a weekend. Marcus took a deep breath before replying. Yes, that's correct. Though my primary focus now is historical research and teaching. The students exchanged glances, clearly bursting with questions. James spoke up. But why didn't you say anything when you were helping me with calculus? You made it seem like you just had a basic understanding. Because I was helping you as a teacher, not as a mathematician, Marcus explained. The techniques I showed you would have worked regardless of my credentials. The point was to find approaches that made sense to you. The students seemed to digest this, though their expressions suggested they had many more questions. Marcus gently steered the conversation back to their coursework, promising to discuss his background another time. As the students departed, Dr. Jameson shook his head with a mixture of amusement and exasperation. You know, most faculty list every possible achievement on their CVs, trying to impress. You might be the first person I've met who deliberately downplayed a doctorate from MIT. It's complicated, Marcus replied. I'm beginning to see that, Jameson nodded. Well, whatever your reasons, you've certainly stirred things up around here. The dean wants to see you this afternoon, by the way. After Jameson left, Marcus continued to his office, his mind racing. The careful boundaries he'd constructed between his mathematical past and historical present were crumbling faster than he'd anticipated. By lunchtime, he had received emails from 3 different science department heads and an invitation to speak at a colloquium on interdisciplinary research methods. The meeting with Dean Collins that afternoon was brief but consequential. The dean, it seemed, was delighted by the discovery of Marcus's additional qualifications. This presents a wonderful opportunity for Westlake, Collins enthused. We've been looking for ways to break down the silos between departments, and you, Dr. Washington, could be the perfect bridge. I appreciate that, Dean Collins, Marcus replied carefully. But I was hired to teach history, and that remains my primary focus. Of course, the dean assured him. No one's suggesting a change to your core responsibilities. But perhaps some joint courses, cross-listed between departments? Or a special seminar on quantitative methods in historical research? The ideas weren't without merit, and part of Marcus, the part that had once been fully immersed in mathematical research, felt a familiar pull toward problems he hadn't allowed himself to engage with professionally for years. But he also couldn't shake a nagging concern about being reduced to a novelty. A 2-for-1 faculty member trotted out to demonstrate the university's commitment to interdisciplinary work. After leaving the dean's office, Marcus found himself walking toward the mathematics department almost unconsciously. He had questions for Dr. Evans, about what she'd shared and why, about her sudden interest in collaboration after weeks of thinly veiled hostility. He found her in her office, surrounded by stacks of papers and an open laptop. She looked up as he appeared in her doorway, her expression difficult to read. Dr. Washington, she greeted him, setting aside the paper she'd been marking. I was wondering when you'd stop by. It seems my mathematical background has become common knowledge, Marcus said, entering her office. I'm curious about how that happened. Evans had the grace to look slightly chagrined. I may have mentioned it to the dean, strictly in a professional context. I didn't realize it would spread so quickly. At Westlake, everything spreads quickly, Marcus pointed out, taking the seat across from her desk. The question is why you chose to share it at all. Evans was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose her words carefully, a noticeable change from her usual confident declarations. After our encounter, I did some research, she finally said. I looked up your publications from MIT. Your dissertation on stochastic modeling of complex social systems was remarkable. Ahead of its time, really. Marcus hadn't expected this. You read my dissertation? Over the weekend, Evans nodded. And several of your papers. Your work on applying chaos theory to predict critical points in social movements, it's fascinating. And it made me question some of my assumptions. About me specifically, or more broadly? Marcus asked. Both, Evans admitted. I've spent 20 years believing that rigorous mathematical thinking belongs exclusively in mathematics departments. That humanities scholars who use quantitative methods are essentially dilettantes, applying watered-down versions of our tools without true understanding. She gestured toward her computer. But your work demonstrates a deep fluency in both worlds. You're not a historian borrowing mathematical concepts, you're a mathematician who chose to apply those concepts to historical analysis. Marcus leaned forward. That's just it, though. I don't separate those identities so neatly. I'm not a mathematician working in history or a historian who knows some math. I'm a scholar whose work happens to require both disciplines. That's precisely why I spoke to the dean, Evans explained. Westlake needs that perspective. Our students need it. Students like Ryan? Marcus asked pointedly. The one who stands in your class because sitting causes him pain. Evans had the grace to look uncomfortable. Yes, well, about that, I've spoken with him. We've arranged accommodations. Because you've had a genuine change of heart, or because you now know his history professor has a mathematics doctorate? Marcus pressed. That's not fair, Evans bristled. Isn't it? A week ago, you interrupted my class to publicly challenge and potentially humiliate me. Now you're advocating for my involvement in your department. What changed, Dr. Evans? The blunt question hung in the air between them. Evans seemed to deflate slightly, her carefully maintained facade cracking. You're right to be skeptical, she acknowledged. But believe it or not, I'm capable of recognizing when I've been wrong. She stood and walked to her window, looking out at the campus quadrangle below. I built my career fighting to be taken seriously in a male-dominated field. Every achievement came with whispers that I'd been given special consideration because I was a woman. Even now, with all my publications and accolades, some colleagues still talk about my work as if it's somehow less rigorous, less important. She turned back to face Marcus. I survived by creating boundaries, proving that mathematics was a meritocracy where only raw ability and disciplined thinking mattered. I convinced myself that the hierarchies between disciplines were natural and justified. And now? Marcus asked. Now I'm faced with evidence that contradicts those comfortable assumptions, Evans replied. You crossed those boundaries effortlessly. You chose history over mathematics not because you couldn't succeed in my field, but because you found more meaningful questions elsewhere. She returned to her desk. It's forced me to reconsider how I've been defining merit, excellence, belonging, not just for faculty but for students too. Marcus studied her, searching for signs of insincerity but finding none. That's surprisingly reflective, Dr. Evans. Don't sound so shocked, she said with a hint of her old sharpness. I'm a scientist. When presented with data that contradicts my hypothesis, I'm obligated to reconsider my position. Despite everything, Marcus found himself smiling slightly. So I'm data now. A single compelling data point that has invalidated several of my working assumptions, Evans clarified, a hint of humor in her voice. Which is why I'd like to propose a collaboration. She pulled a folder from her desk drawer and handed it to Marcus. Inside was a proposal for a joint seminar series on mathematical approaches to historical analysis, co-taught across departments. This isn't about exploiting your dual background, Evans said, seeming to anticipate his concern. It's about creating a space where students can see that these artificial boundaries between disciplines don't have to limit their thinking. Marcus reviewed the proposal thoughtfully. It was well constructed, intellectually rigorous, and genuinely interdisciplinary. Not a mathematical takeover of historical methods, but a true integration of approaches. Students like James might benefit from seeing that they don't have to choose between quantitative and qualitative understanding, Evans continued. And frankly, some of my mathematics students could use a broader perspective on why these tools matter beyond abstract problem solving. Marcus closed the folder, making his decision. I'll consider it. But with one condition. Name it, Evans said. This can't just be about mathematics and history finding common ground, Marcus explained. It needs to address the underlying issues of who belongs in these spaces, whose contributions are valued, and how we create truly inclusive learning environments across all disciplines. Evans hesitated only briefly before nodding. Agreed. Though I should warn you, I'm still learning in that area. We all are, Marcus acknowledged. The difference is recognizing that the learning is necessary. As he left Evans' office with the proposal in hand, Marcus felt a sense of cautious optimism. The path forward wouldn't be simple. Integrating his dual academic identity after years of compartmentalization would bring challenges he couldn't yet anticipate. But for the first time since arriving at Westlake, he felt the possibility of being fully seen and valued for all aspects of his scholarship. More importantly, perhaps this unexpected revelation could open doors for students caught between disciplines, between identities, between the artificial categories that too often limited their potential. If his complicated academic journey could help create more inclusive spaces for learning, then perhaps the challenging transition had been worth it after all. The next 2 weeks at Westlake University unfolded in ways Marcus could never have predicted. His revelation, that the new Black history professor also held a doctorate in applied mathematics from MIT, rippled through the campus community, transforming perceptions and challenging assumptions in its wake. Some reactions were predictable. A handful of STEM professors suddenly wanted to collaborate, their newfound interest in historical analysis suspiciously coinciding with the discovery of Marcus's mathematical credentials. Several students switched into his classes mid-semester, curious about the professor at the center of campus gossip. The university's marketing department reached out about featuring him in promotional materials showcasing interdisciplinary excellence. Other responses were more surprising. Several Black students from STEM majors sought him out, confiding their struggles with isolation and implicit bias in their departments. 2 history colleagues admitted they'd been intimidated by quantitative research methods and asked if he might help them incorporate data analysis into their work. The student newspaper ran a thoughtful editorial about artificial hierarchies between academic disciplines and how they limited educational possibilities. Most unexpected was Dr. Evans' transformation. While still demanding and occasionally abrasive, she had begun actively re-examining her teaching methods. Ryan, the student who had stood at the back of her class due to back pain, reported that she had not only arranged proper accommodations but had apologized to him privately for dismissing his needs. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Marcus was organizing materials for his upcoming office hours when James Miller appeared in his doorway, accompanied by 3 other students from Evans' calculus class. "Professor Washington, do you have a minute?" James asked. "We wanted to talk to you about something important." Marcus gestured them in. "Of course. What's on your mind?" The students exchanged glances before James continued. "We heard about the joint seminar series you and Dr. Evans might be teaching next semester. Is it true?" "We're still working out the details," Marcus confirmed, "but yes, we're planning a course that bridges historical analysis and mathematical modeling." "That's actually why we're here," said one of the other students, a young woman named Zoe. "We've been talking about starting a student organization focused on interdisciplinary approaches to social issues. We wanted to ask if you'd consider being our faculty advisor." Marcus leaned forward, intrigued. "Tell me more about what you're envisioning." "Well," James explained, "a lot of us are interested in using data science to address social justice issues, but we feel like we're constantly having to choose between developing technical skills and understanding the historical and social contexts of the problems we want to solve. The STEM departments teach us how to analyze data, added another student, but not how to ask the right questions about whose data we're using, whose perspectives are missing, or how the historical context shapes what we're seeing. And the humanities departments help us understand those contexts, Zoe continued, but often shy away from quantitative approaches that might strengthen advocacy efforts. The fourth student, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. We thought someone with your background might understand what we're trying to do, create a space where we don't have to leave part of ourselves at the door. The phrase struck Marcus deeply. How many times throughout his academic career had he felt forced to compartmentalize his identities and interests? How often had he encountered the implicit message that being fully himself, black, mathematically inclined, historically minded, boundary crossing, was somehow too complicated, too contradictory for academic spaces? I'd be honored to serve as your advisor, Marcus said without hesitation. In fact, I think this student initiative could tie in beautifully with the seminar series. The students' excitement was palpable as they outlined their initial ideas. By the time they left, Marcus had committed not only to advising their group but to connecting them with resources and potential collaborators across departments. Later that afternoon, he had a scheduled meeting with Dr. Evans to continue planning their joint seminar. He arrived at the mathematics building to find her already waiting in the department's conference room, surrounded by books, papers, and her laptop. "I hope you don't mind," she said as he entered, "but I took the liberty of inviting someone else to join us." She gestured toward the door just as Dean Collins walked in. Marcus raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Dr. Evans has brought an interesting proposal to my attention," the dean explained, taking a seat. "Something more substantial than just a one-off seminar series." Evans nodded. "After our initial discussions about collaboration, I started thinking bigger. What if, instead of just one course, Westlake established an actual center for interdisciplinary studies?" She turned her laptop around to show a preliminary proposal document titled Center for Quantitative Approaches to Social and Historical Analysis. The idea, she continued, would be to create an institutional home for work that crosses traditional departmental boundaries, especially research that applies rigorous quantitative methods to questions typically addressed in the humanities and social sciences. Marcus scanned the proposal, impressed despite his initial skepticism. This wasn't a mathematics department land grab disguised as collaboration, it genuinely emphasized the equal value of multiple disciplinary perspectives. "We'd need co-directors," Evans added, watching his reaction. "Someone from mathematics and someone from history or another humanities field. People who understand both worlds." The implication was clear, and Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions. On one hand, this represented an extraordinary opportunity to institutionalize the kind of boundary-crossing work he valued. On the other hand, he was still new to Westlake, still establishing himself in the history department. Taking on such a visible interdisciplinary role carried risks. "This is ambitious," he said carefully. "It is," the dean agreed. "But timely. Funding agencies are increasingly prioritizing interdisciplinary approaches to complex societal challenges. And frankly, Westlake has fallen behind our peer institutions in breaking down departmental silos. I should mention," Evans added, "that I've already secured tentative commitments from 4 faculty members who would participate, 2 from sciences, 2 from humanities. And there's potential donor interest as well." Marcus looked at her with newfound respect. For someone who had been defending disciplinary boundaries just weeks ago, Evans had pivoted with remarkable speed and thoroughness. "Why the change of heart?" he asked directly. "A month ago, you were defending departmental territories and hierarchies. Now you're proposing to blur them entirely." Evans didn't flinch from the question. "Because I was wrong," she said simply. "Not just about you specifically, but about the entire approach. Disciplines don't exist to protect intellectual turf, they exist to organize inquiry. When they become barriers rather than frameworks, they fail their purpose." She glanced at the dean before continuing. And from a purely practical perspective, I've spent 20 years watching brilliant students walk away from mathematics because they couldn't see how it connected to the issues they cared about. That's a failure I'm no longer willing to accept." The dean nodded approvingly. This kind of center would send a powerful message about Westlake's values, that we recognize excellence across disciplines and support innovative approaches to knowledge creation. As the conversation continued, mapping out possibilities and addressing potential challenges, Marcus found his initial reservations giving way to cautious enthusiasm. By meeting's end, he had provisionally agreed to co-develop the full proposal with Evans, with the understanding that they would proceed only if there was broader faculty support. Walking back to his office afterward, Marcus reflected on the whirlwind his life had become. A month ago, he had been carefully compartmentalizing his mathematical past, focusing solely on establishing himself as a historian. Now he was potentially stepping into a role that would require him to fully integrate all aspects of his academic identity. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, but most importantly, it felt authentic in a way that compartmentalization never had. For the first time since leaving MIT, Marcus allowed himself to imagine a future where he wouldn't have to choose between his love of mathematical elegance and his commitment to historical understanding, a future where the artificial boundaries between disciplines might become more permeable for everyone. 6 weeks after the infamous equation incident, Marcus stood at the back of a packed lecture hall, observing with quiet satisfaction as students filtered in for the inaugural symposium of Westlake's new interdisciplinary scholars program. What had begun as a confrontation had evolved into collaboration, transformed by honest dialogue and a willingness to reconsider entrenched perspectives. The program wasn't quite the center he and Evans had initially envisioned, that would take more time, funding, and institutional buy-in, but it represented a significant first step. For now, it consisted of the joint seminar series, a student organization, a speaker series, and a commitment from the administration to develop more cross-listed courses between STEM and humanities departments. Dr. Evans approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Marcus. "Nervous?" she asked, taking a sip from her own cup. "A little," Marcus admitted. "It's been a while since I've publicly discussed my mathematical work." "Well, you're not alone up there," Evans reminded him with a small smile. "That's rather the point of all this, isn't it?" The symposium had drawn attendance from across departments, science and humanities faculty sitting side by side, students from multiple disciplines filling every available seat. Even Dean Collins was present, seated prominently in the front row. James waved from where he sat with the newly formed Interdisciplinary Student Alliance, the organization that had grown from his initial conversation with Marcus. Beside him was Ryan, no longer standing at the back of classrooms but comfortably seated with proper accommodations, a visible symbol of the changes taking place at Westlake. 2 minutes, Evans murmured, glancing at her watch. "Shall we?" They made their way to the front of the hall, where a podium stood between 2 chairs. The room gradually quieted as they took their positions. "Good afternoon," Marcus began, his voice steady and clear. "Thank you all for coming to this inaugural event of the Interdisciplinary Scholars Program. I'm Dr. Marcus Washington from the History Department. And I'm Dr. Patricia Evans from Mathematics," Evans continued. "We're here today to discuss not just the intersection of our disciplines, but the broader question of how knowledge is created, valued, and shared across traditional academic boundaries." As they launched into their presentation, alternating sections and building on each other's points, Marcus was struck by the unlikely nature of their partnership. The woman who had once tried to publicly humiliate him was now collaboratively building something potentially transformative for the university. Their joint talk explored how mathematical models could illuminate historical patterns while historical context could inform the development and application of those models. They presented case studies ranging from civil rights movement tipping points to the mathematical patterns of economic inequality throughout American history. When they opened the floor for questions, hands shot up across the room. Students and faculty alike engaged thoughtfully with the material, many expressing enthusiasm for the new intellectual possibilities being presented. "This is just the beginning," Evans concluded as the session drew to a close. "We invite all of you to join us in reimagining what education can look like when we stop seeing disciplines as territories to defend and start seeing them as perspectives to integrate." As the applause died down and attendees began filing out, Marcus noticed a group of students lingering near the podium, clearly waiting to speak with him and Evans. Among them was a young black woman he recognized from one of his history classes. "Professor Washington," she began hesitantly, "I'm majoring in computer science, but I've always been interested in African American history too. I've been feeling like I had to choose between them, but after today." She smiled. "Maybe I don't." "You absolutely don't," Marcus assured her. "In fact, we need more people who can bridge those worlds." As the students dispersed, Evans turned to Marcus with an expression of genuine satisfaction. "Not bad for 6 weeks of work." "Just the beginning, though," Marcus reminded her, echoing her earlier words. "Indeed," she agreed. "Speaking of which, I have a meeting with potential donors next week. Care to join me?" Marcus nodded, recognizing how far they had come from that first contentious faculty meeting. "I'd be happy to." As they gathered their materials, Dean Collins approached, beaming with approval. "Excellent presentation, both of you. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking Westlake needs." Later, as Marcus walked across campus toward his office, he reflected on the unexpected journey of the past 2 months. What had begun as an attempt to compartmentalize his identities had transformed into an opportunity to fully integrate them, and in doing so, to help create spaces where others could do the same. He had come to Westlake hoping to make a difference as a history professor. Now he was helping to reshape how the university approached knowledge itself, breaking down artificial barriers, challenging hierarchies, and creating new possibilities for students who, like him, didn't fit neatly into traditional academic categories. It wasn't the path he had anticipated, but as he watched students crossing the quad, some of whom might now see broader horizons thanks to the changes taking place, Marcus Washington knew it was exactly where he needed to be. Dear friend, remember that true intelligence comes in many forms and from diverse backgrounds. When we judge others based on stereotypes or artificial hierarchies, we not only diminish them, we rob ourselves of the richness that comes from different perspectives working together. Education should be about opening doors, not closing them. Let's create learning environments where everyone can bring their full selves to the table, where no one has to hide their talents to fit expectations about who they should be. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more content that challenges assumptions and celebrates the power of seeing beyond labels.